Hello, my name is Edward Sonino, and this is a message for all Democrats. If your real priority is getting rid of Donald Trump above all else, then you must have a platform which is not leftist, which is not left-wing, which is not socialist. That will never win. So, whatever your goals are, you must reach them through a platform which can appeal not just to Democrats, but also to Republicans, by having a platform which has solutions for the social and economic problems of the country, not through controversial measures, through measures which most Americans will agree on. So let's take healthcare. Medicare for all is simply never going to pass Congress, number one. So it's a waste of time making it the part of the Democratic platform. It's also probably unconstitutional because it removes the freedom of choice of Americans. There are so many Americans who have private health insurance that you will lose their vote. There's no way they're going to vote for Medicare for all. So if you insist on having Medicare for all as part of your platform, you're going to lose the election. So if the goal is to win the election and also to address the problem of healthcare affordability, well, instead of having Medicare for all, which is unconstitutional and will never win you an election, then simply have Obamacare improved with more financial assistance for people in need so that everybody gets excellent coverage, not through socialism, not through Medicare for all. America is built on freedom, individual freedom. You don't want to take freedom away from people. Medicare for all takes freedom away from people. So that's the first thing. No Medicare for all. If you really want to win the election, to beat Trump, if that's your real priority, no more Medicare for all. You have improved Obamacare. It's clear. Then it's also important for everybody to understand the causes of the healthcare affordability crisis. It's because over the past 40 years, there have been tremendous technological advances in medicine. Things are done now which weren't even dreamt of 40 and 50 years ago. The problem is all these advances are very expensive to implement. And the average American's productivity and earnings power over the past 40 years has lagged far behind medical technology advances. Why? Because the public school education is really very inadequate. So the sustained long-term solution for affordable health care is for every American to get a truly excellent education. That means we need big reform in the public school sector. But I'll get to that later. So we say the goal is for everybody to have excellent healthcare coverage, but the way to do it is not a controversial, politically divisive way, which is Medicare for all. Make it Obamacare, improved Obamacare, eliminating the things that Republicans don't like and which you can do without because your goal is giving affordable health care. So do it through Obamacare. Number two, very controversial, gun control. Now, just think of it. Every single mass shooter, people who go around shooting people, you can't think that these are normal people. They are neurotic. They have mental illness. There's no such thing as a mass shooter who's not mentally ill, mentally disturbed, deeply mentally disturbed. You also know that there are many ways of killing. If you don't have guns, you can have homemade bombs, you can have arson, you can use trucks, you can use cars, you can use toxic chemicals. There are infinite ways of killing people. So a disturbed person who wants to kill people, if they can't get guns, they'll find another way to kill. So gun control is not the solution. Also, just think of it. illegal drugs. Have laws preventing addictive drugs, have they ever worked? Of course not. You have a black market. Whenever you ban something, you have a black market. The same in prohibition with alcohol. Did those laws prevent people from getting alcohol? Of course not. So if laws never stopped alcohol, they never stopped heroin, cocaine, and all the addictive drugs, why do you think gun control laws are going to work? Why do you think people won't be able to find guns on the street in the black market? Of course they will. So let's forget about gun control and let's focus on mental health. And mental health, the way to do it, preventive mental health, is in every high school, 4 years of psychology courses along with group therapy classes and good parenting classes. Every violent person or abusive person has mental problems due to bad upbringing or simply whatever the reason for mental illness is. If it's not environment and upbringing, then it's chemical imbalance or whatever. But if you have 4 years of psychology in every high school, along with group therapy classes and good parenting classes, you're going to dramatically reduce the number of mentally ill Americans. You'll be able to spot the kids who have problems and then give them individual assistance before it's too late, before their problems grow. So we need prevention if we want to prevent violence, abuse, mass shootings, murders, anything. Mental health, mental awareness. We need psychological literacy in this country. So instead of gun control, which is politically divisive, you're going to lose a lot of votes from gun owners, and that's not going to eliminate the problem at all. So let's do what's reasonable. Focus on mental health. You'll get a lot of Republican votes and a lot of gun owners who are going to vote for a Democrat if it's no longer a question of gun control. So get rid of that. Let's talk about another divisive problem, abortion. Now, why do Democrats insist on abortion, and especially on late-term abortion, 6 months or 7 months fetuses? First of all, nobody can be happy undergoing or thinking about a late-term abortion. I mean, if you're going to have an abortion, have it within the first month or two. And number two, abortion is never a happy event for a woman or their partner, even if it's the first month or the second month. Now, why in the world do Democrats not focus on unwanted pregnancy prevention? Let's shift the focus away from abortion to unwanted pregnancy prevention. 99% of unwanted pregnancies are from high school dropouts. So the real solution for unwanted pregnancies and to finesse the politically divisive topic of abortion is let's make sure that every single young American gets a great education, because kids who study and go on to college, practically none ever get unwanted pregnancies. So that's the real solution, not only to get rid of Trump, for the Democrats to be elected, but it's also a real solution. And second of all, why not promote, for the few times you would have unwanted pregnancies, abortion? There's so many people who don't have children and who want to adopt, and they've had to go to foreign countries to find children to adopt. Well, if we promote adoption for those cases of unwanted pregnancies, we avoid the political divisiveness of allowing abortions or not allowing abortions. Even if you're totally not religious, abortion is not a good thing. It's not a nice thing. So let's focus on the real solution, which is not politically divisive. Then, immigration. The asylum crisis is of our own making, because the asylum law that we have, which is the same one as written by the United Nations and signed by all the member states of the United Nations, has to do with political persecution by governments. That is, the asylum law was inspired by the events of World War II and the Holocaust, where, as everybody knows, it was a question of government persecution of people. So the law of asylum is meant to give refuge to people who are persecuted by their own governments. It is not written for people fleeing poverty or crime in their countries or whatever. So if we apply our asylum law correctly, which we haven't been because bureaucrats have tacked on regulations which start expanding the application of asylum to people who are not persecuted by their governments. That's ridiculous. Asylum is meant for people being politically, governmentally persecuted. So once we make clear that the asylum law applies only to people who are persecuted by their governments, there will be no more asylum crisis, because since we know that there's no government persecution against people in Central America, for example, on the basis of religion, they're all Catholic, so there's no religious persecution. There's no racial persecution because they're all more or less the same race. And we just know that there is no government persecution of people. So anybody coming up to our southern border is not even going to qualify for a hearing, an asylum hearing, because it's common knowledge there is no government persecution in Central America or in Mexico. So you would immediately get rid of these enormous waves of desperate people who are wanting to come to the United States, and they think they can get asylum. So once it's clear that they cannot get asylum, they won't be coming. At the same time, if we really want to help these people, we should be making a major Peace Corps effort to help these Central American countries develop economically and socially. That's the real way to help them, and it's beneficial for us too, because if they have social and economic prosperity, it'll be a great advantage also to us. We'll have much more trade. We won't have any of these illegal immigration problems, etc., etc. So let's not worry about the wall or not wall. Let's not make that an issue. Let's admit that we do have to have logical immigration policies, that we can't have an open door immigration policy. We never had that. It was never considered immoral for a nation to put limits on immigration. I mean, it's always been that way, and nobody said there's anything wrong with that. So let's stop arguing against, let's not have these open door policies, etc., etc. The Democrats have to show, if they want to win the election, that they're going to deal with the asylum crisis. And that's the way to do it. Apply the asylum law the way it's written, and combine that with a major Peace Corps effort to help these countries, these Central American countries, develop socially and economically. And the Peace Corps effort would be through schools and infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So, I've talked about gun control, abortion, illegal immigration. Then, the wealth tax, the Warren wealth tax. That is absurd. Number one, it's unconstitutional. The Fifth Amendment has a no taking of private property clause, which explains why there are no federal real estate taxes, because that would be a taking of private property. So what are really real estate taxes? They're only local taxes, local, not even state, they're local taxes, to cover services rendered to those properties, whether it's police, schools, sewage, local roads, etc. So real estate taxes are not wealth taxes. They're taxes for services rendered to the property. So clearly, a wealth tax is unconstitutional. It's unfair because that would be taxing people who have already paid their income taxes on their earnings. And then you're going to go and tax on their I mean, that's really socialistic. It's against the American way. It's unconstitutional. And then what Warren and Sanders don't understand is what wealthy people do with their money. Either they spend it, which is good for the economy because by spending they're creating jobs. With the money they don't spend on consumption, they invest. And that's also essential for the country because they're either investing in venture capital, financing all these startups and all these high-tech companies, or they're buying treasury bonds to finance the government. So taxing the wealthy is ridiculous, apart from being totally un-American and making no sense. So get rid of the wealth tax. The Democrats cannot be the party of taking away from people, either taking away private health insurance or a wealth tax, both of which are unconstitutional. So the Democratic Party has to be for social and economic prosperity, solving poverty, getting rid of poverty, which is all due to a low level of education, and that's due to inadequate public schools, including the curriculum, which is totally inadequate. And since having every single American well-educated, very well-educated, is in the national interest, the federal government should be funding public school education. And since we want a universally high level of education all over the United States, no exceptions, there should be a mandatory core curriculum, an enlightened one, along with a very ambitious national high school graduation exam, because we want all our citizens to be well educated. We don't want areas of the country where the level of education is lower or not. If we have a very well educated citizenry, we'll have social and economic prosperity and very low taxes. So that all makes sense. And even Republicans will go for this type of a platform. There's no such thing as good policy is good for all Americans. We can't have a policy of class warfare. We can't say that the Democratic Party is the party of unions and the working class. Well, what about all the rest of the Americans? I mean, that's ridiculous. Every party, including the Democratic Party, should be for all Americans, and it should have a platform which solves all social problems and economic problems. And as far as an economic policy, to always avoid recessions and high unemployment, of which we have had them repeatedly over the past 30, 40, 50 years. We need to have as a standard economic stimulus policy QE financed tax rebates. Tax rebates, number one, they work immediately and they are fair because every single taxpayer gets the same tax rebate. And if it's financed by QE, that is by the Federal Reserve, there's no problem as far as budget deficits or debt, because when the Federal Reserve finances something, it's actually printed money. And as we've seen, we've had the Federal Reserve finance our budget deficits, the entire budget deficit from 2010 to 2014 with printed money. That saved the system. Now, many people say, oh, printed money, that's inflationary. Well, we've seen that printed money is not necessarily inflationary because we've had no inflation with all these. We had $3 trillion worth of QE, quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve, printed money, $3 trillion. That didn't cause inflation. Why not? Because inflation only comes if you print too much money. That means you're creating excess aggregate demand, the situation of too much money chasing too few goods. So let's make an example. If you have a bathtub and it's half full of water, you're not going to have a good bath, right? You open the hot and cold water, you let it run as fast as you can, and as long as you turn off the hot and cold water before the bathtub overflows, you're going to have a good bath, and you're not going to have any overflowing of the water. This is similar to an economy. An economy is like a bathtub. To have a good economy, the bathtub has to be practically full. Money is the equivalent of water. So an economy needs enough money to practically get to the edge, to the top of the bathtub, in order for the economy to be good. So whenever we have an economy which is slowing down or in recession, it's because there's not enough money. There's nothing wrong with the Federal Reserve printing money, and the way to do it fairly so that nobody complains, everybody gets the same tax rebate. And it works immediately because it only takes a few days to mail out these tax rebates. Everybody gets the same check, and the Federal Reserve can calculate how much money is necessary to immediately nip a recession in the bud and to avoid high unemployment. So we need to adopt QE finance tax rebates as our standard economic policy. Then one final thought. Climate change, another controversial subject. The Democrats should not continue to insist that pollution is causing climate change. The Democrats should instead say, we're against pollution. Everybody's against pollution. Even Republicans have to be against pollution. Who wants dirty air, dirty water, etc., etc.? Any place. We don't want it. But let's not justify pollution control measures by saying that that's the way to control climate change. First of all, it's not. Because just think of it. We've had 5 ice ages and 5 major, great global warmings in between those ice ages. And that was before there were any human beings. It was nature. So keeping that in mind, why is it not more logical to think that the current warming we're in is simply the continuation of the latest global warming following the latest ice age? It's totally illogical to say that it's due to pollution. It's just totally illogical. Then explain why we had 5 ice ages and 5 great warmings following each ice age when human beings and pollution was not involved. So, yes, the Democrats should have as part of their platform, eliminate pollution of all sorts, whether it's air, water, whatever. But don't justify it by saying that that will stop climate change. Because, first of all, you'll lose a lot of votes, and then it's not even true. And if anybody truly believes that eliminating pollution is going to stop the global warming, that's a delusion, because it's clearly due to nature. There's nothing we as human beings can do to stop ice ages and global warmings. Nothing. Finally, why do we never solve our problems? Our social problems, our economic problems, our foreign policy problem. Our foreign policy has been a disaster for decades and decades and decades. Why? Because our politicians are not truly qualified. If you want to be a doctor, you've got to get a degree in medicine. And if you want to be a lawyer, you've got to get a law degree. And in both cases, then you have to pass the state exams, the bar exam for lawyers and the medical boards for doctors. If you want to be president of the United States, you don't have to show that you know anything. And in fact, none of our presidents knew anything. Can you name one president we've had who's been an expert in his or her own right? Well, we haven't had a female president yet. Has we had any president or senator or representative who have been experts in their own right in economic, social, and foreign policy? Not one. So how can we have people governing us who are not experts? the idea has been that they don't need to know anything. They'll just surround themselves with advisors, so expert advisors. But that clearly, that modus operandi has not worked. And it's clear why not. If you yourself are not an expert, how do you know how to pick a good expert? And how do you know how to synthesize good advice from inside your administration and outside the administration? You can't. You can't. If you're ignorant, you can't. So, what we need is for every single political candidate, before running, to prove that they are truly qualified, highly qualified. What does that mean? Being able to list and explain all the major errors, all the major mistakes in economic, social, and foreign policy over the past 100 years, and which would have been the correct policies. A person who can't do that is not qualified to be either a representative or a senator or president. So if we make that a requirement, all of a sudden we'll start getting highly qualified people in Congress and in the White House, and everything's going to change. I mentioned the curriculum for public schools needing to be greatly improved because we have totally inadequate teaching in our public high schools. So that's a topic I won't go in now because this would be too long of a video clip. But you can take a look at my essays on my medium.com site and on my LinkedIn site. My name again is Edward Sonnino, and that's spelled Sonnino. So, if the Democrats really want to get rid of Donald Trump, they need a platform which appeals to all Americans. It cannot be a class warfare platform. It cannot be a socialist platform. It has to be a platform, an intelligent, workable platform with common sense solutions to our social and economic problems. If they do that, they'll win. If the Democrats insist on having a candidate, a left-wing candidate, forget it. We'll have 4 more years of Trump. Is that what you want? So, in the primaries, be very careful whom you select. I really don't recommend voting for Sanders or Warren, nor do I recommend any policies of raising taxes, including capital gains taxes. That's bad for the economy. And how many Americans invest in the stock market and would not want to vote for somebody who's going to raise capital gains taxes, which, by the way, often are taxing inflationary gains. They have nothing to do with real gains. And just think of everyone who's selling their home, their primary home, for whatever reason, because they want a smaller home or they want to change where they live, go to a different state or downsize or whatever. If you've bought a home 30 or 40 years ago, or even just 20 years ago or 10 years ago, you may have a big capital gain if you sell that house. And you end up, after taxes, not even being able to afford a similar home someplace else. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. We have to eliminate long-term capital gains. A Democratic candidate and platform, which also eliminates long-term capital gains taxes, will win the election. So Democrats have to be for solving social and economic problems, having highly qualified people in government, not having a class warfare platform, and avoiding needless ideological divisive policies. Let's have policies which really go to the bottom of problems, solve them without ideological characterizations. Let's go for reforms which really work, which all Americans will vote for. Thanks for listening.